Well, it is great to have all of you with us today. My name is Chris. I just want to give a warm shout out to everyone across all of our locations and watching online. And we're in the summer months and vacation is here. And I just want to encourage all of you. There's just something about the rhythm of our weeks that really help us as we just navigate through life. And I know that, summer is vacation time. And I just want to encourage all of you. I mean, when you go on your we there's just something about, we talk about we're one church right where you are. And it's what I love about our online campus is no matter where you go, you can still connect in. And when you connect in online, I just want to engage in the conversation. Some of you have never tried our online campus. You need to. And if you find yourself like family vacation, you got your laptop out and your view is like this beautiful ocean front view, please snap a picture, send it to me. I promise you I won't have bad thoughts out loud. But seriously, just as you're thinking through the rhythm, there's something about staying connected. So I just want to encourage you to stay connected. Also, we have a great tool that I just want to highlight, that every message we do, we develop a discussion guide. And the discussion guide is there to help you as you navigate the step out of the message. A lot of our life groups use our discussion guides. You can even just grab a group of people, and it's one page. It's so simple, but again, it takes the message on the weekend. It just helps you take one step further in your spiritual journey. Again, great tool for you. Go to tcconline.info. If you're not in a life group, you can go to tcconline.info, click connect, and we'll help you get connected into a life group as well. Well, we're kicking off this new series called Crushed, Pressing Through the Heavy. And I have 3 have you ever questions to ask all of you. And here's the thing. I think out of all 3 of these questions, you will have at least thought of at least one, if not all 3 of these questions at some point in your life journey. Maybe the wording's a little different. Maybe you would phrase it differently. But the heart of these questions, I think all of you, again, at least one of these questions, you've at least thought about at some point. The first have you ever is this. Have you ever walked into a church, any church, and thought to yourself, I might get struck by lightning? Right? You know that feeling? For some of you, you get it. Maybe that's your experience right now. It's like you haven't been in church in a long time. And you're just thinking to yourself as you're driving to church, like I might walk in and someone like me God might just strike me down. Have you ever found yourself driving to a church before? And as you're driving to the church, you turn your car around and you go back home. There's something about you just couldn't bring yourself to walk into a church. Have you ever found yourself sitting in a church parking lot and you see the front doors? I mean, you should go in, but there's just something keeping you from leaving your seat in your car. You pick up your phone and you start acting like you're texting someone. You start acting like you're on the phone and you wave at people and you smile as they walk into the church and you're just saying to yourself, there's no one here on my phone, but I'm just going to sit here longer because there's just something about, walking into a church. Maybe for the first time, maybe in a long time. Have you ever been at that place? Let me flip the question. Have you been standing in the lobby of a church before and you see that person walk in? And you literally think to yourself, I'm going to stand way far away from that person because lightning might actually strike them. Let me ask a different question. Another have you ever? And this one's a little bit more pointed and a little bit more painful. Have you ever been kicked out of a church because of something you did? Have you ever been removed from a church because of something you did? Have you ever been shunned by a church because of something you did? Have you ever been slapped with a scarlet letter because of something you did? Have you ever been talked to because of something you did? Have you ever walked into a church and everyone just stopped and stared at you because they know what you did? Have you ever felt isolated in your life? Have you ever, right? Think about that. Some of you, that hits so close to home. Let me flip to this question. Have you been the one kicking someone out? Have you been the one shunning? Have you been the one slapping the scarlet letter? Have you been the one when that person walks in, you stand there in your little circle and you all stare at that person? You're like, yeah, do you know, we know what they've been doing. Have you been the one? You see, as Christians, as church people, we have perfected the art of developing our signs, haven't we? We carefully craft our signs with very specific words to point out why everyone else is wrong. We're bold with our signs. We hold our signs. We're right. You people are wrong. We as Christians, the church, have perfected the art of separating and segregating people into different groups. And if you're part of our group, then it's all good. But if you're in these different groups, then we're going to just look the other way. We as Christians, the church, have been so committed at tolerating the things we want to tolerate and being so intolerant of everything else. We as Christians, the church, have become so good. We're experts at accepting who we want to accept and rejecting the people we want to reject. We as Christians, the church, have been so good at setting a set of rules that we like to follow and setting another set of rules that we like to ignore. And all of this leads to the third, have you ever? Have you ever felt like God doesn't love you, won't love you, can't love you? And this isn't some small question, because if you've ever felt like I just can't walk into a church because I'm not sure what God's going to do and I'm not sure what those church people are going to do. If you've ever been shunned, removed, kicked out, scarlet letter slapped upon you because of something you've done, I'm just telling you, those two questions lead to this question, and this is a massive question. Have you ever felt like, man, God just can't love me, won't love me, doesn't love me? Not how I've lived, not the decision I've made, not the thoughts that have entered my head, not me. There's just no way. There's just no way. Now, the title of the series is Crushed, Pressing Through the Heavy. So, we're going to take a little detour, okay? So this is what I want everyone to do. Everyone online as well, across all of our locations, on the count of three, everyone just take a deep breath. 1, 2, 3. Doesn't that feel so much better? It's nice now. Because here's the thing I know. And this is why we're going to go on this detour. Right now, some of you are like, yeah, preach it. And some of you are on the other side going, I now have my 12-point outline of why I disagree with everything Chris just said. So here's our detour, and this is why the detour is so important. All of you have some type of church religious background. I don't know what it is, but you have something, some framework. Maybe it's zero church, but you have a framework. Maybe all you know about church is a movie that you saw, or maybe you grew up in some type of religious church context. But any type of religious church context, church service, mass, synagogue, all has some similar components. And one of those similar components is there's someone that gives a message. So that person, that rabbi, that priest, that pastor gets up on a stage and they stand behind maybe a pulpit, right, or some big large wooden object, and they give a message, right? They have an introduction. It's supposed to captivate your attention. It might or might not work. They give 2 or 3 or 12 supporting points. And after a semi-determined amount of time or not determined amount of time at all, they give a conclusion, right? They're done. The service ends. You leave. The next week, it repeats. Introduction, points, conclusion. Tri-County, we see this in a vastly different way. We develop one message. But this one message is somewhere between 2 to 3 hours long. And here's what I know, because I'm a pretty intuitive individual. None of you, including myself, wants to hear me talk for 2 to 3 hours in one sitting, right? Some of you laughed really loud. Right? Like no one wants that. But we develop one message, but we break it up into, for this series called Crushed, 4 parts. Sometimes it's 3 parts, sometimes it's 6 parts. But we break up this one message into individual parts. Those individual parts come together. It's all called a series. So this series is called Crushed. This is the first part of a 4-part series. And here's the thing I'm just going to tell you. This is important for every series we do, but it's so critical, especially for this series. I'm just going to tell you. There's going to be things we talk about in part 1 that's going to leave you hanging, that's going to leave you question marks, or you're going to grab onto and you think that's the entire story from the Bible, and you're like, oh, Chris said it, it's real. No. The entire message is 4 parts. You need all 4 parts. If you miss 1 or 3 out of the 4, I'm just telling you, you're going to miss. You're going to miss it. A while back, I got an email from a gentleman. It doesn't go to Tri-County Church, but he's been connected into Tri-County Church. He lives in a different community. We don't have a location there. And so he connects every once in a while. Someone had sent him a link to a message, and he watched it, and he decided to send me a 2.5 page email. Lengthy. It was a very well-crafted email. It wasn't a hateful email. It wasn't an angry email. It wasn't a rock-throwing email. But he wanted to dismantle this entire message theologically. His first opening paragraph is, I follow Tri-County Church from afar. I've always believed in what you guys have done. And I always thought that Tri-County Church was very conservative, very orthodox in its theology, its understanding of God, the Bible, Jesus Christ. And then I watched this message. And then for the next 2 pages, he tore it apart of why we were wrong theology. So I read through it once and I was like, okay. He was, again, very respectful. I want to highlight that because some people would just want to prove a point, and the point is, you're wrong, I'm right. He was just trying to extrapolate all of these different thoughts of how he listened, perceived this message. So once I got done, I reread it a second time. And when I reread it a second time, all of a sudden there's a light bulb that went off. And it was like, So I hit reply, and instead of replying with 2.5 pages, I replied with 2.5 lines. My first line was very appreciative. Thank you for engaging me in the conversation. Thank you for being so respectful. I mean, in a day and age where it's all about being right, very few people understand the art of saying, you know what, I'm just going to engage in a conversation. Not an argument, a conversation. So my first line was thank you for engaging in the conversation. I really appreciate how you approach this. But all of this leads to one simple question. Did you watch the entire series? Send. I waited. And just a short time after, I got a reply from him. This time, his reply was not 2.5 pages. It was about 2.5 lines. And this is what he said. Thank you for responding to me. Because probably when he hit send, he didn't think I would respond to him. He goes, and you ask a good question. And then he wrote these words. Context is everything. I'll watch the series. I waited, and all of a sudden one day I received an email from him. And he goes, I watched the entire series. And you could tell his entire angst around theology had rapidly dissipated. Now he has some questions around methodology, which is fine. That's fine. I take incredible ownness around the theological direction of Tri-County Church. Like that is one thing I own. I mean, whoever communicates, I'm making sure like we are aligned with what the Bible says. It's one of those things where there's so much content that gets left on the editing room floor, so to speak. Why? Because I'm just making sure that everything that is taught is aligned with the Bible. It's one of those things that is a weight that I carry. And quickly, his email, his angst went from a theological concern to some methodology. And here's the thing with methodology. Methodology always changes. Always changes. I'm fine with that. But so many times in conversations, people want to have a methodology conversation. They apply theology to methodology. And I always separate out the two. Like, whoa. We're talking about methodology. Methodology changes. It just does. One point, an organ was like a really cool instrument. last time I checked, it's not the coolest instrument around. The piccolo is. No, it's not. If you play piccolo, I'm sorry, I did not mean to offend you. Right? Methodology always changes. Theology, no, it doesn't, right? And so we just had a methodology conversation. That's great. But here's the point of all of it, is if you just listen to one, I'm just going to tell you, you're just going to take what you want to listen to. And you might even like that, or maybe you're like, I'm opposed to that. I'm just saying, you got to get the entire message. And for this series, it's so critical. So critical, it's so critical. So, detour done. We're coming back. 3 questions. 3 have you ever questions. And within all 3 of those have you ever questions, there's 2 words, 2 foundational principles, 2 foundational insights that get attached to those 3 have you ever questions. And maybe you've never used these words before, or maybe you have overused these words in your spiritual journey, but these 2 words, I just tell you, are interwoven, entangled into those 3 have you ever questions. And those 2 words are these: truth and grace. Truth meaning God has a framework, a very defined framework in which how we should live our life here on earth. There's guardrails, there's direction, there's specifics, it's truth. And grace, meaning God, a perfect God, understands that his perfect truth, how we should live our lives, we're never going to reach that, ever. So grace closes that gap. Grace covers, the Bible uses the word sin, when we miss the mark. God has this mark, this goal for us to reach, and we're just going to miss it. And grace covers that. And these 2 words, truth and grace, are interwoven into all 3 of those. Have you ever questions? And here's what we do. Maybe cognitively or not, maybe you've never even thought about it this way. We put these 2 words in 2 lists. Now, let me preface this. This is another important part. The list, the words on these 2 lists that we're going to develop here in a moment, I'm not saying I agree with or disagree with. I'm not saying they're in the Bible or not in the Bible. I'm not saying that they're true or not true. All I'm saying is, attached to these 2 words, truth and grace, we attach some pretty specific words, ideas, thoughts, to these 2 words. For instance, to truth, we attach law. There's rules that you must follow, right? Hence why some of you thought you were going to get struck by lightning walking into the journey. You just know intuitively at some level, you're not quite following the path that God wants you on, and you just know maybe you don't know the specific rule, maybe you don't know the specific location in the Bible for that rule, but you just know there's some type of rule, some type of law that you must follow. It's why some of you were removed from the church, right? You broke the law. And grace says you're exempt. That feels better. You're like, hey, I broke the rule, but I'm exempt. Doesn't matter. Truth says it's conditional. If you follow God's framework, right, there's conditions on that. You must follow that framework that he has placed on your path. It's conditional. Grace says, no. Everyone's accepted. Doesn't matter. The truth throws you in jail. And do you remember playing Monopoly? Oh, what a great game. I love to dominate Monopoly, especially when my kids were younger and they really couldn't count money and all of that. I never cheated, by the way. That would be wrong. Kind of. But remember the get out of jail free card? Oh, yeah. Grace is like the never-ending get out of jail free card, right? I mean, you have this endless supply. You know, no matter how much truth throws you in jail, you just play that card. You just play that card. You just play that card. Truth is all about guilt. I messed up again. I messed up again. I messed up again. Grace. That feels so loving. Truth is like a hammer. I mean, just waiting to whack you. Grace, it's like a warm blanket on a cold winter day. And here's what we do. We develop our lists, we attach words to truth and grace, and then we build this massive wall in between these two lists, don't we? And we all do this. For some of you, you grew up in a context where it was all grace. I mean, you ignored this true sight as much as you could, and if you showed up and if you went to confession, you got another get out of jail free card. Wow. You would leave confession, you just go on in your merry way. You lived your life however you wanted to live because all you had to do was show up and confess, and someone would say, you're forgiven, and you would move on. But then you look back in your life and it's a mess, and you're like, oh, but I got to get out of jail free card. For some of you, you grew up in a context where grace was non-existent. It was all truth, all law. You had to follow all the rules. And you're exhausted because that's not attainable. But we even do this to each other. We all do this, by the way. We play this little grace and truth game. Whatever you struggle with, I mean, you know, I don't have to give a list of possibilities. Right now, you know. That dark corner in your heart, that thing that you try to hide from others and hide from God, that thing that keeps you from wanting to go to church because you think you might get struck by lightning, that thing that you know, the Bible uses the word sin, right? That place in your life where you're just like, it has its claws in me, it has its tentacles wrapped around me, that thing that is just a stranglehold on your life, and you're trying to get through it, you're trying to break it, you're trying to overcome it, but you know what that is. That area in your life, you want grace, don't you? It's a warm blanket. And when you connect with someone who struggles with something you're struggling with, guess what you say to that person? Yeah, but isn't it amazing that God covers you with grace, right? Here's a blanket, just wrap it around, it's awesome. But just like you have that list that you struggle with, that I struggle with, there's another list. That list are the things you don't struggle with. It's not even a temptation for you. You've never even thought about doing those things. And on that list, there's not a warm blanket. There's a hammer. Oh, and that's why Christians, church people, are so great at crafting their signs to smack everyone on that list with their hammer. I mean, when it comes to their life, give me the warm blanket. Everything else, we're going to apply the law. And we all do it. That's why when you hear a story about someone doing and you fill in the blank and it's something that you don't struggle with, you can stand in your circle and you can look over at them and you can stare them down going, I can't believe that they. I can't believe that they. I can't believe that they. And one of the goals in this series, I'm just telling you, the church has mastered this. That's why for some of you, you have stayed away from church for so long. That's why some of you are watching online right now because you can't bring yourself to step back into the church because what a church has done to you. One of the goals in this series, we got to change the way, because remember, the church isn't some like fictitious building. It's like the church is over there. No, it's people. And all of us make up the church. All of us do this. We play the grace and truth game to what benefits us at that point in life. And we have to realize it's not how God structured, it's not how God purposed, it's not how God desired the church, people, you and me, to live. We got to realize that the church, the church, we have to think differently. We have to realize that God did not orchestrate two lists with a massive wall in between where subjectively we get to decide how to apply grace and how we get to apply truth. That we have to understand that God had a much different plan for these two words. We have to realize. Because for all of us, for us to grasp how God views grace and truth, how God lenses through these two words, how God has purposed grace and truth, we must grasp how God views us. I'm telling you, it starts there. For us to understand how God views these two words, grace and truth, we must first start with, how does God see you? How does God see me? And here's the thing. Jesus is going to change the entire way people thought about God. When Jesus came, it was this Greco-Roman world. In that pagan Greco-Roman world, they believed that their gods were way up in heaven, that they as human beings were down on this earth, that their gods were disinterested with these lowly little human beings. In this Greco-Roman world, the gods did not want to be bothered with mankind. The gods did not want to be troubled with the issues of human beings. The gods got frustrated every time a man, woman would try to bring them into their world. They're like, leave us alone. We got our own issues. Leave us alone. We're battling against ourselves, right? In this Greco-Roman world, the gods were disconnected. And in this Jewish worldview, people like you and me had developed some 613 laws. They developed law upon law upon law to clarify other laws. And now to get to God, you had to make your way through some 613 laws. And Jesus, at the very beginning of his ministry, guess what he did? He reshapes, flips upside down, gives a brand new perspective that no other worldview had ever seen before. And he does it. Well, he does it when he teaches us how to pray. Now, here's the thing with this prayer. If you've never memorized anything in the Bible, I'm pretty sure you know this. If you grew up in some type of religious school, Catholic school, Christian school, whatever school that was, I'm sure they invited you, made you, however you want to word it, to memorize this prayer. Maybe this is the only way you've ever known how to pray. And Jesus says this is how you should pray, and this is important. Jesus never said this is the only way to pray, that you must recite it this way. Jesus was just teaching people how to pray. He was giving an idea so when people would approach God, they would know how to pray. And he said, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today your daily bread and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors, and lead us. And right now you all want me to finish, to resolve it, and I'm not going to. I'm really not. Because you know how this ends. You all know this prayer, right? And what's tragic about this prayer, it's just become one of those traditional, liturgical things we say. I mean, just like robots. I just can bounce through this whole prayer. For some of you have a twitch back in you because you're going back to childhood like, oh no, not this prayer again. But when Jesus was teaching us how to pray, how he begins shifted everything. Because he says, when you pray, you say, our Father. You don't call God some big, eloquent name. Call God what he is. He's your dad. And you could feel everyone go, whoa, no. You remember the Jewish worldview, the Jewish culture. Guess what? They had a name for God that they couldn't say out loud. And Jesus is like, no, you have to understand that everything's shifting, everything's changing. When you talk with God, that's what prayer is. When you talk with God, call him dad. Call him dad. He's your father. He's not distant, he's close. He's not detached from you, he's right next to you. He's not uncaring, he's so caring. Call him dad. You could feel everyone. It's like, ooh, this is a new way to look at God. And Jesus is like, no, this is the way to look at God. And for some of you, this is what becomes really difficult. Because how you view your earthly dad is how you're going to view your heavenly dad. It just is. how you see your earthly dad. I mean, how you view gets attached to how you view God as dad. If you view your earthly dad as missing, that's going to get attached to how you view God the Father. If you view your earthly dad as angry and abusive, you're going to view your earthly dad as angry and abusive. If you view your earthly dad as emotionally not connected to you, never said I love you, never hugged you, guess what's going to get attached to how you view your eternal Father? I'm just telling you. This is, at one level, you're like, that feels so good. But in reality, I know for some of you, you're lensing through your earthly dad and you're trying to see God differently, and that's so difficult to do. So difficult to do. So this is what I want to encourage you to do. Instead of you lensing to God as Father, I just want to flip that upside down. And I'm just telling you, this could change your spiritual path forever. Instead of you trying to lens through your earthly dad and trying to see God differently, you have to see how God sees you, how God views you. Because your grasp with God's view of you, that God looks at you as son, that God sees you as daughter, when you start going, okay, God, I'm trying to look at you as dad, and I just can't get there, but I'm just going to flip upside down because I'm just going to think about you seeing me. God, how you see me as son, how you see me as daughter. When you grasp God's view of you, that he is calling you his son, his daughter, it will shape your view of his truth and grace. Paul, writing to all of these different churches, started to use this word that was unheard of 2,000 years ago. Adoption. Families didn't adopt unwanted kids. Those kids were just left to die. There was almost no value put on children. That blows our mind. We can't grasp that. I'm just saying 2,000 years ago, children, no value. And all of a sudden, Paul starts writing to these different churches, and guess what he starts talking about? That God, as Father, that through Jesus Christ, we are adopted as sons, as daughters. And again, you're talking about shaping culture. People are like, adoption? Yeah. When the world says you're not wanted, God says you're mine. The more you realize how God sees you, that he sees you as son, that he sees you as daughter, I'm just telling you, that will shape how you see truth and grace. Changes everything. Changes everything. John, one of the closest friends to Jesus, at the very end of his life, he's writing the story, we call it a book, the Gospel of John. He's writing the story of Jesus. And the very beginning of that story, chapter 1, it's like John's giving this overview. He's like, okay, I've seen it all. I remember the time where Jesus walked up to me, invited me to come follow him. I remember the first miracle. I remember Jesus' first teaching. I remember the times where we really messed up and Jesus still, he pointed it out, but he brought us close. I remember the time where Jesus died. John was there. He saw it. I remember seeing Jesus alive. I remember sitting on the beach when he just went toe-to-toe with Peter. Like, John, remembering all of this, looks back, and the very beginning of the story, as he's writing out, he gives us 30,000 feet overview. And John chapter 1, I'm just telling you, if you want to grasp this point, read John 1. And John writes these words. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the... And remember, John was a good Jewish boy growing up. He lived in a tradition, a worldview, a religious worldview where there's a name for God that he couldn't even pronounce. And I think he gets to this point, and now he's like, years later, he looks back and he's like, I never thought I would use this word for God, but Father, Dad. And I think he just smiled as he wrote that word. But then he wrote this statement, full of grace and truth. Huh? Wait. There's not two lists. There's not the grace bucket and the truth bucket. There's not a big wall in between them, full of grace and truth. Like complete grace and complete truth. Like those are all in one bucket, all together, all mixed. I mean, full of grace and truth. And that's where we'll pick up next week. Let's pray. Lord, I'm so glad that we can call you Dad. I'm so glad that you view us as your son and your daughter. Lord, I pray if people haven't heard anything, that they will grasp onto that, how you view us. Through your son, we are adopted. You have chosen us. You call us. Lord, I pray that every single person will understand the love that can only come from you. The perfect representation of Dad is how you see us, and it's how you love us. In your name I pray. Amen.